From October 9th to 19th of this year, I attended the 69th BFI London Film Festival as a press delegate. This meant I had access to most films at the festival through press and industry screenings. I also bought tickets to certain public screenings. I wanted to take full advantage of this opportunity, which I don't take lightly, so I set out to see basically as much as I could. Over the course of the festival, I saw 32 feature films and 21 short films. Of these, 19 were press and industry screenings, while 16 were public screenings. Truthfully, it was an exhausting experience. Although seeing multiple films per day, every day for an extended period is something I love to do and would gladly do again, the earliest press and industry screenings started at 8 a.m., and the latest public screenings would easily start as late as 8 or 9 p.m., and that's not accounting for the lengthy commute in and out of central London, so there were days where I was waking up around 6 in the morning, staying out all day, and only getting home and to bed after midnight, only to do the same thing again the next day. I was really burning the candle at both ends, and if anything, I think this put more pressure on the festival selections to wow me. If a film wasn't sufficiently engrossing, I was in real danger of falling asleep, and I know I wasn't the only one. I also think just seeing this many movies in quick succession raises the bar for each film. Many films might be satisfying enough in isolation, but in a sea of other intriguing, original offerings at all levels of budget and experience, they have more of an uphill battle to stand out. So as you can imagine, there were films that really wowed me and films that really didn't, and all manner of films that fell somewhere in between. You've probably heard of some of them, and you probably haven't heard of a lot of them. So today I'd like to give you my takes on everything I saw. I am not a big fan of numerical reviews for movies. I actually stopped doing star ratings on my Letterboxd ages ago because of this. I just think movies and our experience of them are far too mysterious and subjective to exist within the constraints of a 10-point or 5-star scale. So for this video, I am instead going to end each review with a Siskel and Ebert style thumbs up or thumbs down, which will symbolize whether I overall enjoyed the experience and would recommend seeing the film. I'm going to go day to day in chronological order of when I watched these to best relive my festival experience for you. It'll be like you were there. I technically got to the festival a little late. They actually start doing press and industry screenings a few days before the festival starts, and it had actually started on the 8th, and I landed in London on the 8th, so I wasn't able to start seeing stuff until the 9th, so I did miss a few of the big films of the festival. But the very first film I saw on the morning of October 9th was The Voice of Hind Rajab, directed by co-author Ben Hanya. Hanya made the 2024 documentary Four Daughters, which I never actually got a chance to see, unfortunately, but I heard was good. I was a little apprehensive going into this one because the premise of the film is that it's essentially a docudrama, but largely dramatization of the murder of Hind Rajab, who was a 6-year-old Palestinian girl at the hands of the IDF. It was a really harrowing event. Rajab was not only murdered, but prior to that, she was trapped in a car with, I believe, 6 of her family members who had all been killed. So she was trapped in a car with 6 corpses while on the phone with emergency services for several hours. And when I heard that this film dramatized those events, I remember being a little worried, wondering if maybe that could verge on exploitation. My first question was, why couldn't this have been a documentary? And now having seen the film, I think I do understand the motivation behind it a little more. I wonder if Ben Hanya realized that there had already been a lot of nonfiction coverage of this event, that there had already been a lot of news, a lot of social media coverage, a lot of first-person accounts and whatnot. There is something uniquely affecting about drama. It appeals to people's sense of pathos in a way that, unfortunately, nonfiction doesn't always, depending on the person. And as the film even mentions at one point, people, but especially Westerners, have been rather desensitized to violent current events in general, but especially the genocide in Gaza, either because of how saturated images of that are right now, or perhaps because of our general physical and emotional disconnect from these things because of the way our culture works and our news cycles and all sorts of things. So having now seen the film, I think I do understand the impulse to dramatize this, because I wonder if the director thought that might be a better way of appealing to the emotions of especially Western viewers. And I also think Benhania gets away with this in a tasteful enough way by not making it a super sentimental Hollywood type dramatization. Like I said, it's essentially docufiction in genre, and the film actually blends this dramatic reenactment with real elements from real life, like real recordings, real social media videos that were taken at the time. And even the dramatic reenactment is a very, very faithful reenactment of things that we actually have on record, like phone calls and whatnot. There are scenes amongst the characters off the phone that are more extrapolations, but the primary bulk of the movie is very, very faithful to reality. And I'm sure there are many arguments to be made about the very nature of the medium and dramatizing this at all, and even the way you present things on camera, not being objective, obviously. But I thought she managed to do it pretty tastefully. And I think if you have any concerns about the presentation and whether it's exploitative at all, I would just recommend seeing the film yourself and gauging your own opinion. I found it very affecting and pretty tasteful, I would say. So I would give The Voice of Hind Rajab a thumbs up, I guess. It's not exactly an easy film to watch, but that's not really the point. The only real concern that I have is that I think a film like this will likely not reach the viewers it could really stand to reach. The next thing I saw that day was a Chinese film called Resurrection, directed by Bi Gan. Resurrection is an epic, genre-bending film that's essentially an anthology. It's about dreams. We start with this sort of German expressionism-inspired story about a semi-dystopian future where humanity has lost the ability to dream in exchange for eternal life. And there's one person or creature left on Earth who can still dream, and this woman is tasked with tracking him down and going inside his dreams to figure out what's going on. The primary framing narrative is not that easy to parse, but it's really kind of an excuse to go into all of these vignettes. The presentation of the film is wild. It's extremely creative and innovative. It makes really exciting use of the medium in a way that I have not seen in a very long time, if not ever. There are art direction and production design elements that almost remind me of like a Peter Greenaway film. Like I said, the framing narrative takes inspiration from German expressionism, these 1920s silent films. There are some direct references to things like Nosferatu, but the vignettes go in all sorts of different directions in terms of style and influences. I read somewhere that apparently each one is supposed to be based on each of the five senses, which maybe makes it all make a little more sense. I would have loved to know that going into the film. I didn't. And ultimately, the main thing I took away from Resurrection is I interpreted it as essentially an elegy for the medium of analog film itself. There's this recurring motif of deteriorating, melting film stock. And there's also a recurring motif of melting candle wax, and you actually see how visually these two things kind of echo each other. I can't say I fully understood the utility of the anthology format or what each anthology vignette necessarily meant, but I thought it was an extremely enjoyable, enchanting, mesmerizing cinema experience. I think it's worth watching, absolutely. One of the anthology segments consists of this really impressive 30 or so minute long take. And I don't always love a long take in a movie that's meant to show off. It sometimes feels unnecessary or like it's just showing off. This one was very well done. I think I read that this director has done that sort of thing before. There are a lot of moments in the film that make you wonder, how did they do that? And I always think that kind of thing is worth a watch. So I would give Resurrection a thumbs up. I don't know if it'll be available anywhere near you, but if it is, you should watch it in a theater if possible. The final film we saw on the 9th was the LFF surprise film. Like a lot of film festivals, the London Film Festival will do a surprise screening at some point. When I attended LFF in 2023, it was Michael Mann's Ferrari, and although a lot of my commenters got mad at me for not really knowing much about Michael Mann, which is kind of fair, I stand by my take that Ferrari was very bad and a very disappointing surprise film. This year it turned out to be a film called Tuner, directed by Daniel Roher, who I think prior to this was best known for his documentary Navalny. I believe this was his fiction debut. Side note, we were kind of confused as the festival director Christy Matheson announced the surprise film because she, of course, has this strong English accent. And so she said tuner, but she said tuna.
To introduce this wonderful film, would you please welcome Oscar and BAFTA-winning director of Navalny, Daniel Rohr, producers Joanne Seller and Lila Jacob, and the star of Tuna, Leo Woodall.
And we were like, tuna? Did she say tuna or tuner?
And the star of Tuna.
And funnily enough, in the film, there's a bit of a motif, like in the title sequence or the credits or something, there's a motif of like a fish. So I think there is a bit of an intentional wordplay there. But from a British person's mouth, it was actually quite confusing. But yes, the film is called Tuner, and it's a bit of a heist comedy drama about a man with very intense, enhanced hearing who works as essentially an apprentice piano tuner to a piano tuner played by Dustin Hoffman, but eventually gets picked up by this mobster kind of guy to help crack safes because with his enhanced hearing, he can crack safes. I had never heard of this film before, but I thought it was pretty solid. It's well made, it's well structured, it's a little funny, it's a little poignant, it has a very satisfying screenplay, and it really never overstays its welcome. Like if there's a scene or a joke that you're about to get tired of, it just moves on, which I thought was nice. I'd give it a thumbs up. It's not my very favorite thing I saw in the festival, but I thought it was quite successful. October 10th was one of my busiest days. We started the day with Yorgos Lanthimos' new film, Bugonia, which is a crazy film to watch at 8:10 in the morning. I really liked Bugonia. I thought it was very entertaining, very tense, very gripping. It was honestly a lot more brutal and gruesome and horrific than I was expecting. I know Lanthimos does do stuff like that sometimes, but I don't know, from the trailers, I think I was expecting more of a thriller, and seeing the film, I would call it more of a horror film. Something I didn't know about the film until after watching it is that it's actually a remake of a South Korean film called Save the Green Planet. So I'm definitely interested in watching the original now. Queasiness and all, I really enjoyed how twisted and dark and horrible it was. The film has an interesting ending, and I'd be curious to read more about people's interpretations of the ending, like themes-wise, but generally I thought it was really enjoyable. I would recommend it. Thumbs up. I next saw a film called Lady, directed by Samuel Abrahams. This was a world premiere at the festival. It was a little UK mockumentary about a documentary crew going to a big sort of nobility estate in the country to interview / do a profile on this woman who belongs to English nobility. This was the first film of the festival that I really didn't like. I wanted to see this film because it sounded like a funny premise to me. It was a comedy, allegedly, so that's why I went to see it. I love a mockumentary for comedic purposes. I think it's such a freeing genre with so much comedic potential. And this film just doesn't make much use of that potential. It feels a little all over the place in terms of concept, screenplay. It immediately sort of goes in a lot of different directions with its concept instead of kind of straightforwardly following through, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think the execution in this particular film was not great. Immediately, it was clear that it would not be very funny. The jokes were just not landing. It felt like maybe it had a lot of improvisation, which again can be fine, but sometimes the improvisation of the actors is not enough to save a film that doesn't really have a lot else going for it. We're mainly following this noble woman who's this eccentric, kind of pathetic character, but we're also following the director of this fictional documentary, who's this young guy, and he becomes such an unlikable character. There's a very strange turn in the film where rather early on, they have the director get high with the subject of the documentary. They drop acid or something, and they have a fun day together, like they're bonding a little bit, and then they sleep together for some reason. And the movie's not a romance, nor is it about like the bad obsessive relationship between them. So I thought it felt really unnecessary to have them randomly sleep together. It felt a little cheap and a little easy in a way that I didn't like. One problem throughout is that the film could not seem to decide how seriously to take itself. There are a lot of moments, and kind of the initial premise seems like it will be very irreverent and completely farcical. But then there are a lot of moments that try to make you care and suddenly turn the story into something inspiring. And those two tones clash. They don't meld successfully. On that note, I found much of the film really overbearing and emotionally manipulative in those moments where it was trying to be more touching. The score in the film is quite overbearing and manipulative. In that sequence I mentioned where the two characters get high together, there's this really drawn out, overly long part where they're just sort of exploring the grounds together, and it's clear that they're supposed to be emotionally bonding, so they're blasting this horrible, emotional, inspiring score over it. It sounds like free YouTube music. And to top it all off, it's just not funny. The jokes are not funny. I also have to say, not to just twist the knife deeper, but I looked up this director and I found that he made a short years ago called Connect. And this blew my mind because when I was at school for film, when I was attending the prestigious University of East London film program, I had a class one day where our teacher was showing us some short films, and one of the films he showed us was Samuel Abrahams's Connect, and I just hated it. My issue was basically that I found the film overly sentimental and emotionally manipulative and rather generic in its ultimate aesthetics and themes. I remember saying to a classmate as we left that day that it felt like it could have been an ad for Cadbury chocolate or something. So it's just wild to me that that director of this one random short film that I happened to dislike years ago when I saw it turned out to make this other movie, and I also didn't like that. So this director's style and subject matter he chooses might just not be for me. But I can't say I would recommend Lady. I would give it a thumbs down. But Samuel Abrahams, if you're watching, keep trying. Next that day, I saw the film The Testament of Anne Lee, directed by Mona Fastvold, which I thought was quite good. It's a film about Anne Lee, who was one of the founders of the Shaker religion, which I didn't know much about going into it, but now I know a fair bit about. The film is kind of a musical because hymns and singing were very important to the Shakers. It's not a traditional musical, but it includes a lot of music, and that does weave into the story a good deal. I thought it was a very ambitious film and pretty successful at pulling off its ambitions. It's just this epic, sprawling historical film, but it doesn't feel boring or cliched in any way. It feels original. My big takeaway from this one was that I wouldn't be surprised if this is a big player in award season. It felt like that kind of movie. I'd give it a thumbs up. I'd watch it again. I then saw a public screening of a shorts program. The way they do it at LFF is they'll sort of organize short films into various thematic strands. So this one was called Roots and Branches, which meant it was about like people's origins and identities and whatnot. I have a confession to make, which is that I wasn't vibing like crazy with the short films in this year's festival. Most of the shorts programs I saw, I was not that impressed by that many shorts, I'm sorry to say. Of this program, I probably enjoyed Majid Zafar, We Had Fun, and Queen the most. There was a documentary early on that I just found a little elementary. It felt like it hadn't quite picked a specific enough angle for its subject. And interestingly enough, the last film in the program was directed by Idris Elba. Like that Idris Elba. And although it was competent and, well made, perfectly fine, it was quite conventional, which made it not really wow me, especially in a film festival setting. But, good for Idris Elba for pursuing his directorial dreams, I guess. It wasn't bad or anything. Finally, I ended that day with a film called At the Place of Ghosts, directed by Breton Hannam. This is a Canadian film, I believe, made by and starring and about mostly Mi'kmaq people. It also incorporates a lot of Mi'kmaq language. The film is kind of a horror thriller. It's a supernatural story, which I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the atmosphere of the film. It's very creepy and slow-moving and dreamlike. It incorporates all of this stuff with timelines and the past affecting the present and the future and multiple timelines existing at the same time. I found the film maybe a little winding, like not always super focused, but never in a way I didn't enjoy. It was also the end of this very busy day when I'd seen a lot of films, so to be fair, I don't think I was at my most focused as a viewer. I really enjoyed the film. I loved the performances of the leads, who I had never seen in anything else, but I thought were both really charismatic. I just loved to see a film, especially a genre film, from a perspective I've never really seen on screen. So I would give this one a thumbs up. I enjoyed it. On day 3, I started my morning with a film called cktoys, directed by Annapurna Sriram. I was excited for this one. All I had really heard about it was that it was this subversive, kind of genre-bending, uproarious film, and I didn't end up liking it as much as I'd hoped to. It's this zany, kind of John Waters-esque film about a young woman played by the director who realizes that she's had a curse put on her. So she goes on all these little misadventures trying to break her curse. I was into the premise and some of the ideas and characters in it, and it's very visually striking. It's shot, I think, on 16mm with all these glorious colors and a lot of beautiful people in it, but overall, I found it a little unfocused, unfortunately. I think unfocused was kind of a theme of a lot of the films in this festival that disappointed me. I also found it a little overly affected. I often have that problem with films at festivals. I feel like I see a lot of festival films, especially debut films from debut directors, that are very, very concerned with visuals and aesthetics, but maybe don't spend as much time on story and screenplay and structure, and that's always a disappointment for me. Film is ultimately a visual medium, and I don't always need a story to be extremely structured and by the book, but it needs to have something that keeps you engaged the whole time, and I didn't quite get that from cktoys. Ultimately, my issue was that it was never quite funny or poignant enough for me to buy what it was selling. I admit I'm not a huge fan of directors casting themselves as well, so that was like playing on my mind a little bit. But I also want to bring up what I perceived as a bit of a conflict in the movie, which is just that on the one hand, like I said, the film is going for this very transgressive, grungy, kind of John Waters vibe. There's a lot of queerness in the film and a lot of kind of callbacks to the John Waters grungy queer subculture, And at the same time, the film is highly concerned with aesthetic beauty. And I thought there was a bit of a dissonance there where it felt like we couldn't quite fully commit to the grungy subversive transgression because we were so caught up in beauty and aesthetics And I didn't always like that. I think it's worth a watch. I've seen some good reviews of this. I think if you happen to really vibe with the aesthetic and sense of humor the film has, you might really like it. But for me personally, it was a bit of a miss. And I definitely liked that it clearly came from a creative new voice. I'd definitely be curious to see what this director does in the future, but it didn't quite hit the mark for me personally. I would have to give it a thumbs down, but not an emphatic thumbs down. I would still recommend you see it if it looks like it might be up your alley. Later that day, I saw Chloe Zhao's new film Hamnet, which is based on a novel, I believe, and the novel itself is loosely based on the life of William Shakespeare, specifically when he met his wife and had his children, one of whom, the little boy Hamnet, ended up dying. And it's kind of not only about the genesis of his family, but then this loss and his grief and how he and his wife came to terms with that. I believe there's a lot of fictionalization in this. Me and my friend who I saw it with, we tried to look up the real story afterwards, and we were like, oh, no one really knows anything about it. So I think most of the details are kind of speculation on the part of the novel's author. I actually liked this film more than I was expecting to. I guess I thought it might be a bit of a dry, conventional historical awards baity drama, and I found it more moving than that and a little more unique than that. I was especially liking the first act of the film, and I think it finishes strong. My friend that I saw it with was like really, really moved by the ending. I did find the middle portion of the film, or maybe like the late middle portion of the film, a little too windy for me, not quite focused enough. It didn't quite grab me the entire time. I think the central performances from Paul Mescal and especially Jessie Buckley are really strong, so I would give it a thumbs up generally. It wasn't one of my favorites, but I would recommend it. Then I got to see the public screening of Jafar Panahi's new film, It Was Just an Accident, which won the Palme d'Or at Cannes this year. I'm a big fan of Panahi. I was first introduced to him in my senior year of high school when I had this great film analysis and criticism class, and we watched The White Balloon for that class, and also The Circle, I think. And I've also seen The Mirror and Three Faces by him. If you don't know, he's one of the foundational filmmakers of the Iranian New Wave. He's very prolific, and he's known for his really transgressive filmmaking in the sense that he was actually banned from making films in Iran for like 20 years. He's been imprisoned before. It's funny, he was banned for making films, but of course he didn't actually stop making films. So there are many interesting stories about how he got around that ban. I always remember an anecdote about him supposedly smuggling a film on a thumb drive inside a cake to get it across the border to a film festival. He's a really notable person, not only for his filmmaking, but for just his actions and his resistance. And this latest film, It Was Just an Accident, is apparently inspired by some of his experiences when he was imprisoned in recent years. So it follows these people who were all political prisoners together at some point, and they think they've tracked down this sadistic warden who terrorized them when they were imprisoned. And they're kind of trying to figure out if it's really him and trying to figure out what to do with him throughout the film. And it becomes this very philosophical meditation on their experiences and how they think they should respond to their experiences. I love Panahi's subtle and grounded style. He's very kind of matter-of-fact in the way he shows things. Iranian cinema in general, at least the new wave, tended to be very kind of fly-on-the-wall observational. And Panahi in particular, I think, has such an unpretentious style, just allowing things to play out and unfold in a really natural way that I find so engaging. I was struck by two standout long take sequences in the film where the camera's kind of just static or mostly static on some characters as they either have a conversation or interrogate this guy that they've captured. And the director just lets the performances and the characters speak for themselves. And I found it so impressive that he was able to make those sequences without cuts feel so natural and play out with so much tension. I wouldn't say it's constantly enthralling because, like I said, it's very naturalistic and just sort of lets things play out at a natural pace. But the overall experience is really poignant, and it's got this chilling ending. I think Palme d'Or deserved, basically. I think everyone should see it. I give it a thumbs up. My final film of the 11th was Luca Guadagnino's After the Hunt. Oh boy, you've probably already heard some polarized reactions to After the Hunt. It's gotten highly mixed reviews from what I can tell. And I'm only going to add to that. I have a mixed review of After the Hunt. Like every Guadagnino movie, it's extremely visually sublime. It looks so beautiful. Everyone in it looks so beautiful. And not just that, the direction, the editing, the sort of pacing of the scenes is so deliberate and rich in a way that's very engrossing to watch. However, screenplay, right? After the Hunt was the debut screenplay of a young screenwriter, and I guess I'm impressed with like her vocabulary, right? A lot of big words in this film. I am not so impressed with everything else. I think politically, this is a very confusing film. I had a lot of questions going into it about the premise, and not a lot of those questions were answered. I feel uneasy about the film's perspectives on a lot of things. It really seems kind of obsessed with interrogating victims of sexual assault and the generation wars. It's really concerned with how you can't say anything anymore because all these woke liberals just pounce on any straight white man just for existing. And what's crazy is it was really hard to tell if the film was trying to critique that mindset or if it just genuinely felt that way. And what I would say is that even if it was trying to critique that perspective, I don't think it really succeeded. I think it kind of ended up just parroting and therefore perpetuating those ideas, which I don't agree with and think are very bad. So I didn't like that. I was troubled by Ayo Edebiri's character. I was troubled by what the story seemed to be trying to say with her. The film can't seem to decide how it wants to depict her, if it wants her to be right or wrong, if it wants her to be a manipulative liar or not. And I was uncomfortable with that. I don't think the film made a clear stance either way, and not in like a nice, artistic, ambiguous way, but more of an insidious, uneasy way. I did find the story more compelling than I expected. I found one particular thread in the film compelling, and you might know what I'm talking about if you've seen it. There's something going on with Julia Roberts' character that is eventually revealed that I thought was really interesting and gave the film some potential to say something. But that revelation happens, and then the film keeps going and does this coda at the end that makes the story all the more murky and confused, and I did not like that. I thought the coda took away from it more than anything. Generally, I'm not sure why Guadagnino was interested in this project. I'm not sure why any of the actors were interested in it beyond the prestigious director being attached. And frankly, what I perceived as the political leanings of the film and the way they were expressed in the film, they make me question the taste of everyone involved. I think there were a lot of missed opportunities in the film, story-wise, character-wise, and I thought a lot of it was weird. I thought some of the characterization was rather poor. Michael Stuhlbarg is wonderful in it, as he always is, but I found his character very confusing. I feel like this only makes sense if you've seen it, but I thought his characterization was all over the place. Oh, and finally, probably my biggest actual gripe with the movie, beyond like the uneasy politics of it, was the absolutely insufferable dialogue.
When did offending someone become the preeminent cardinal sin?
Maybe it's around the same time your generation started making sweeping generalizations about ours.
To me, this is where it became clear that it was a first-time screenwriter. Luca actually said this thing while introducing the film. He was like, this is a debut screenplay from this screenwriter, but you would never believe it. And watching the film, it was like, I believe it, actually.
Had your chosen cell with niceties and trigger warnings.
I am a desperate man, absolutely desperate.
It's that thing where most of the characters speak in kind of an interchangeable way. They all have this extremely overwritten, overwrought affect. Early in the film, I was actually writing down notes in the dark of lines that I thought were ridiculous. The one full line that I wrote down was, "Don't let your modesty veer into delusion." Writers, screenwriters, seem to think that academia is full of these people who talk like, I don't know, characters in a third-rate Donna Tartt novel. It felt unrealistic, it felt embarrassing, and it felt highly amateurish. So again, I didn't think the film was all bad, and I'd be curious to read more analysis of it, maybe, but I would have to give it a thumbs down. There were things about it that were just insufferable to me. On the morning of October 12th, I was supposed to see Nia DaCosta's new film, Hedda, but my bus didn't come, so I actually missed that screening, but my friend saw it and said it was just okay. I then got to see a public screening of Lav Diaz's new film, Magellan, starring Gael Garcia Bernal, who's one of my favorite actors ever, which is mostly why I wanted to see this one. Lav Diaz is known for slow cinema. He tends to make these very long films that emphasize slowness. So Magellan is actually one of his shorter, zippier films, relatively, and I liked it. It's a very epic historical drama about the life of Magellan. And given that it's by a Filipino filmmaker, it is very much focused on this anti-colonial lens of the story, which I thought was a very interesting and original way to tell this story. I was appreciating the interesting balance the film had between humanizing Magellan on the one hand, but also being very plain about the inhuman things he did, the brutality of his colonial projects. I read after the fact that there are some things in the film, particularly toward the ending, that are considered historically inaccurate. Apparently, Lav Diaz took a controversial reinterpretation of certain historical events. I don't know enough about it to really have an opinion on this, but that's one thing to watch out for if you're someone who knows a lot about Magellan's colonization of the Philippines, that there's something in here that is apparently not really considered true by a lot of historians. He basically posits that this one indigenous chief, I believe, was actually not real, was actually an invention on the part of other indigenous people to try to convince Magellan to fight in this battle where he would inevitably lose and die. And I could see the argument for why that lends some agency to those indigenous characters, but I think you could also argue that it takes away agency from this indigenous guy who, by all accounts, did actually exist. But overall, as a film, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good take on the historical epic, very slow, but in an effective way. I'd give it a thumbs up. The last thing I saw on the 12th was a film called Reflection in a Dead Diamond, directed by Helene Cate and Bruno Forzani, which is this surreal, kind of farcical take on the 1970s Euro caper film. I really enjoyed this. It's not really a straightforward story. Like, there's not really any point in trying to literally understand what's happening in it. But if you take it as just this surreal, abstract, experimental genre film, it's really entertaining. It has all these crazy, gory action set pieces that are really fun. beautiful visuals, beautiful colors. Like I said earlier, I do often see festival films that are a little bit style over substance, for a lack of a better phrase. They are very concerned with aesthetics, but don't spend as much time on the story. And I think this is an example of a film that does not have a straightforward story, but is still very engaging in its way. I could see it being a little polarizing. I could see some people not liking it, but I had a great time. I would recommend it. The first film I saw on the 13th was Kelly Reichardt's new film, The Mastermind. Now, I have been hearing a lot of negative reviews of this film. People saying it's boring, people saying it's too slow, and I'm here to tell you that those people are wrong. I really liked The Mastermind. I thought it was one of the best things I had seen at the festival at that point. It's very meticulous and deliberate. Everything feels like an intentional choice. Josh O'Connor gives a great performance. Alana Haim gives a great performance. I really can't conceive of this critique of it being boring or too slow, because I thought it felt quite short and then ends abruptly in a way that I loved. I loved the ending. I think thematically you could take it as kind of a commentary on the consequences of apathy, the consequences of being complacent, being a bystander in larger political movements. It's also just an entertaining depiction of how much easier it used to be to commit crimes. Like, our art thief very much doesn't get away with it, but the idea that you used to be able to just rob an art museum in broad daylight is pretty staggering. I would highly recommend this film. I thought it was very good. I would say if you haven't seen it yet and you've been seeing these negative reviews, don't listen to them. Listen to me. They're wrong. I'm right. I'd give it a thumbs up. I then saw Mark Jenkins' new film, Rose of Nevada, which I enjoyed. Jenkins previously did the UK film Bait, which I heard a lot about at the time, but I never did see. I know he's known for this very grainy, gritty film that he shoots in, and Rose of Nevada is more of a thriller, almost a bit of a horror at times, almost a bit sci-fi at times. It's an interesting genre film. It's all about fishermen. It takes place in this sort of dying fishing town, which I found really compelling and atmospheric. His usage of that grainy film really added to the atmosphere of the film. It makes it look so much creepier and grungier. And similarly to the film At the Place of Ghosts, I really liked the story's incorporation of time and timelines and this sort of cyclical, inevitable timeline going on. I did find the ending a little confusing or a little unsatisfying, but the overall experience was very effective. I would give it a thumbs up. Finally, I ended the 13th with Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, which was a bit of a disappointment for me, I'm sad to say. I like Guillermo del Toro a lot. I realized that he is a little conventional compared to a lot of the more art-housey directors who tend to be in similar conversations as him. I do think he used to be more art-housey, and we've kind of seen him go a little more conventional throughout his career. And this film, for me, is the straw that finally breaks the camel's back on that front. It's highly Hollywood and conventional in a way that I thought took away from the film and the story. My friend and I speculated that perhaps this was the influence of Netflix, who produced this film, is distributing this film. Overall, there's just a heavy, kind of corny conventionality to it. It's very straightforward. There's a lot of hokey narration, and the ending is weirdly sentimental and feel-good in a way that feels a little jarring. There's an unsatisfying element to the ending in terms of the relationship between Victor and the creature. I didn't love that. And I also didn't love the creature design. Okay? I said it. I wasn't even anti-Jacob Elordi playing this role, and I think he does fine. It was kind of hard to tell if he was good or not, honestly. But the creature design I found quite boring, and I was really disappointed in that, because when you go to a Guillermo del Toro film, if nothing else, that's what you expect to be good, right? His sense of visual monsters is so strong. And so to see this Frankenstein's monster who's just like kind of a white, muscular guy with some lines on his face. I mean, he looked like Alex Pettyfer in Beastly, dare I say. It almost felt like maybe Netflix stepped in and were like, hey, tone it down. We want to be able to see Jacob Elordi's big, beautiful head. You know, from Del Toro, our modern master of the macabre, I was hoping for something really out there. And given that the story is all about the humanity of this monstrous figure, I was hoping for something really nasty that then we could pull the humanity out of. But no, it's just this guy. He kind of looks like that thing from Prometheus. I don't actually know what that thing is because I've never seen Prometheus, but it looks like that thing. To be clear, I did find it enjoyable enough throughout. I didn't mind it. I would watch it again. I didn't hate it, but I was disappointed in some major things. Probably my favorite parts of the film were when Del Toro really leaned into the macabre parts of the story. There are these sequences where we see Victor Frankenstein actually constructing the creature out of cadavers, and those parts are very grisly and gory and nasty, and I liked that because that both feels unique, it feels like a new thing that Del Toro is adding to his adaptation, and it's so Del Toro, it's what he's good at. But overall, I don't think the film is that big of a hit. I don't think it's a great success, which is sad because Del Toro introduced the film and he talked about how profound of an influence Frankenstein has been on him, how he saw it as a child and it affected him so deeply, and he's always dreamt of making his Frankenstein. And that saddened me having seen the film because it feels like this is not his dream Frankenstein that even he wanted to make. I don't have proof of that. Maybe he loves how it turned out, but it doesn't feel like the culmination of this lifelong dream, you know? So I would have to give this one a thumbs down. I think you probably still should watch it, and it'll be on Netflix, so it's not like it'll be hard to watch it, but it's just not that great of a Frankenstein movie or a movie period. I had a very interesting day on the 14th. I started the day off with two really strong films. The first film I saw was an American movie called She's the He, directed by Siobhan McCarthy. They mostly go by Shiv. I didn't know much about She's the He going into it. I think I had decided not to see the big screenings of that morning for some reason. And so I had this time on my hands, and I had gotten an email from the publicist of She's the He, I think. At first, I had erroneously thought it was a short film, and upon hearing that it was a feature, I was actually more interested. All I really knew going in was that it was this teen comedy with a largely trans and queer cast, and that it was like this posing as trans comedy.
We both pretend to be trans.
No,
Nobody will think that I'm gay literally ever again. Hello? Hello, women?
And watching it, I was very pleasantly surprised. I don't think I was expecting to dislike it or anything, but knowing that it was this indie teen comedy from a first-time filmmaker, I think I expected it to maybe hit me a little like cktoys did, like maybe something creative and new, but kind of unfocused. But no, I found the film really tight, really well written, and extremely funny. It actually appealed to my sense of humor a ton. It's got a great cast, including some really, really funny people. There's this trans comedian, Nico Carney, in one of the lead roles. I said this when I interviewed the director, spoiler alert, but I think he's like the breakout star of the film. He's so funny. The lead actress also does a great job. She just has kind of a more thankless part as the more serious protagonist. All of the supporting actors are really funny and compelling. It devolves into this kind of boys versus girls thing at the end, but putting a lot of interesting trans and queer twists on it that you probably haven't seen before in the teen comedy genre. The use of music in the film really appealed to me specifically. There's a needle drop late in the film where I was like, okay, I think this movie may have been made in a lab to appeal to me specifically. It just kind of came out of nowhere for me as this hidden gem, seeing as I hadn't really gone in knowing much about it or having many expectations for it. And I love finding a hidden gem at a film festival. I love a funny comedy at a film festival because a lot of festival films are on the more highbrow, esoteric, often kind of bleak side. There's a lot of seriousness at a film festival typically. So it's always fun to see a really irreverent comedy that really lands with your audience you're watching it with. I was so taken with She's the He, and I remembered that I had seen that email from the publicist, like asking press delegates if they would do press for the film, that I decided to email and see if the director would be up for an interview. And very luckily, I managed to catch the director and their producer on their last night in London. We could have set up like a Zoom interview after that, but I thought it was so special to get to talk to them in person. Big highlight in my YouTuber career. But yeah, we had a great interview. I posted the whole thing on my YouTube a while ago, so you can watch it if you'd like. And I really got to respect them, not just as a person who I kind of got along with, but as an artist. They brought up, specifically when I asked about influences, they mentioned 2 films. One of them was Curse of the Black Pearl, and one of them was this Czech new wave film, Daisies. And I'm so obsessed with that. I personally am really into this intersection between the kind of campy mass appeal stuff and the more esoteric arty stuff. I think that's so fun, and it speaks to me so personally. I just got the sense that this was someone with a really strong voice who really loved movies and has seen a lot and thought a lot about the stories they want to tell. And like I said in that interview, I'm really excited not only for this film, but to see what they do next. And I also have to say, the audience response to She's the He was kind of unlike anything I've ever seen at a film festival. The night I interviewed the director, I ended up tagging along with them to the end of their public screening at the Prince Charles Cinema, where they were about to give a Q&A. And so we saw like the credits play, the audience go absolutely crazy. First of all, there's a blooper reel in the credits of this movie. And when I tell you I've never really cared for a blooper reel at the end of a movie, I never really find it funny or interesting. I was sitting through this blooper reel and I was loving it. Like, it's an actual funny blooper reel, which says something. But the whole crowd was doing the same. They were laughing uproariously at this blooper reel. I leaned over to the producer of the film. I was like, this is crazy. But then in the ensuing Q&A, a million hands fly up as soon as it opens up to audience questions, which is not always the case at a film festival Q&A. But then everyone who asked a question, none of them were really interested in asking questions, which actually is typical of film festival Q&As. But it was like everyone who had raised their hand actually just wanted an opportunity to gush to the director about how much they had loved the film and how much it had meant to them. And then they would tack on a bit of a question at the end. But that outpouring of love, I had to tell the producer, I was like, I've never really seen anything like this. This feels really special. In that audience, at least, it felt like it was the movie that these people had been waiting to see all their lives. With all of this, I don't mean to oversell it. The film pretty much does just follow the conventional high school movie formula, but I think that's kind of the point. It's treading this familiar ground with this new lens of, let's make kind of a defining trans teen film. And again, it does do these clever little things with the gender play of it all. There's a very ridiculous moment in the climax that has to do with like menstrual blood and menstrual products. And the director mentioned at the Q&A at Prince Charles that they were kind of doing this meta joke where a lot of the cis boy characters were actually being played by trans men. And so having them have such a gross out reaction to menstrual blood was like a bit of a meta in-joke. And I think the film is just full of stuff like that, where it actually is elevated beyond that tropey level because of all this crazy gender play going on. So I would highly recommend it. Thumbs up. Again, it was a hidden gem of the festival for me, and because it's become kind of my pet movie of the festival, I'll leave a link to like the website, the link tree, where you can see if maybe it'll be coming to a theater near you. They're kind of going on tour right now. But I was off to a great start on the morning of October 14th. I also really enjoyed the second film I saw that day, which was a Thai film called A Useful Ghost, directed by Rajab Chachoke. I have no idea if I'm saying that right. I hope I am. I usually look up interviews with filmmakers and actors if I'm not sure how to pronounce their names, and I did that for this filmmaker, and none of the interviewers say his name out loud. So That's too bad for me. I apologize if I got it wrong. This guy is a debut director, by the way, which I was shocked to find out after watching the film. It had such a confidence and such a technical competence that I had just kind of assumed, not being very familiar with Thai cinema, that this must be some master Thai filmmaker, his latest film. But no, he was one of the debut directors in the festival. This is a really interesting, original, funny movie that starts as a story about ghosts possessing vacuum cleaners and ends as this bombastic, violent social commentary. I loved it. Again, it's very funny. It includes just a lot of really original and therefore really outrageous scenarios. Like, it features more than one human vacuum cleaner sex scene. It maybe started to feel a bit long in the second act, but again, the ending really brought it back around for me. It's got a great final act. I would be very curious to see what this director does next. I'll definitely watch it. Thumbs up, I'd recommend it. But unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, because the third film I saw on day 6 was Anemone, the film by Daniel Day-Lewis's son, starring Daniel Day-Lewis. Anemone was just terrible. Just terrible. It is extremely dull. An extremely dull, banal melodrama that's sort of disguising itself in the aesthetics of art house, highbrow cinema, but can't hide its dullness with the visuals and Daniel Day-Lewis's performance. It's got an uninteresting story and even less interesting execution. I actually heard the woman next to me start snoring maybe 20 to 30 minutes into this film. I also witnessed a lot of walkouts, people just getting up and never coming back. And this was a press and industry screening where theoretically we all have more of a responsibility and an incentive to sit through the whole thing. There are kind of two stories going on within the film. Like, there are two locations that we cut between. They never felt connected throughout the story. Like, the film does not succeed at weaving them together. There are occasional, more surreal, artistic moments that feel out of place and just kind of nonsensical. The film is far too long, and just about every scene exhibits this very rookie mistake that you see with first-time filmmakers, where every shot, every scene just lingers a little too long. I think sometimes inexperienced filmmakers will be so in love with their own material that they struggle to self-edit and exercise restraint and just cut themselves off, end the scene, end the shot, whatever. I kind of couldn't believe what I was seeing. I think it was about 20 or 30 minutes in, around when the lady next to me fell asleep, that I realized that I was bored and was not enjoying the film. I kind of realized at that point that much time had passed and virtually nothing had happened yet. But by the end, I was actively very angry at this film. I really feel like it wasted my time. And maybe it was compounded by the fact that I had just seen these two films that morning, two films both by debut filmmakers, which were so original and fresh and did so much with limited resources, limited time, that to then see this film by a guy that no doubt had way more resources than the average debut filmmaker because of his station in life, because of his family. It was frustrating to see resources, in my opinion, wasted on something like this. It's a little infuriating, and I think it's insulting to the audience. So I'd give that one a firm thumbs down. That evening, I went to the gala screening of Bradley Cooper's new film, Is This Thing On? If you know me, you might know that I have never been a fan of Bradley Cooper's films. I thought A Star is Born was really not for me. I thought Maestro was actively terrible. And so I had specifically bought a ticket to specifically the gala screening of this film because I knew it might be contentious. I was very curious to gauge my opinion on it. And first off, kind of infuriatingly, this happened to be the screening that I had the best seat for. I was in the front row. I was very, very close to all of the talent that showed up, which was Bradley Cooper, Laura Dern, Will Arnett, and some other people. Sorry, I forget. So that was cool, but it also made me mourn all the other screenings that I had been more excited for, but couldn't get good seats for because there were fewer available. But honestly, I thought Is This Thing On was probably Bradley Cooper's best film yet, probably his clearest-eyed venture yet. It's a pretty simple endeavor. It's kind of a feel-good film, a classic sentimental Hollywood kind of story, and I think the film pretty much succeeds at what it sets out to do. I think Bradley Cooper did very well this time by not casting himself in the lead. It feels a lot less myopic and self-indulgent for that. And also, Will Arnett is a comedian, and he's a good comedian, so he helps carry the comedian angle of the story. Cooper did cast himself in a small role, but I think he works better as this type of comic side character. So again, it's a little sentimental, it's a little conventional, it's not really my type of thing, just in terms of story, in terms of presentation, but it works as what it is. I think this would be a good parent movie. I think your parents will probably like it. Like I said, I think it's probably Cooper's best film yet, but because it is a less showy film than his previous offerings, I wonder if it will achieve the same level of critical success as those previous two films, despite, in my opinion, being a better work. I'd give it a thumbs up, but I don't know how many of you will be that interested in it. If it sounds like your kind of thing, then go see it. If not, you're not gonna miss out terribly by not seeing it. I started the 15th with Park Chan-wook's new film, No Other Choice. This is kind of a dark comedy satire. There's this guy who's been laid off from a paper company. He wants to get a job at a new paper company and becomes so desperate that he essentially starts planning how to murder the competing applicants for this paper company. I thought the film was very engaging, very biting, and surprising. I liked that you never really knew where it was going to go. For some reason, I couldn't quite fully connect and get on board and love the film, but I think that might have been more on my end. For some reason, this was one of my more overstimulating viewing experiences. Somebody was kicking the back of my seat for the entire time, so I wish I had enjoyed it more, but I don't know that that was the film's fault. I would give it a thumbs up. I think it's another success from Park Chan-wook. I then watched a UK thriller called Retreat. This is a film made by a deaf filmmaker, and I believe most, if not all, of the cast are deaf or hard of hearing, so the vast majority of the film is in British Sign Language. It's an interesting kind of culty thriller about a woman who arrives at a deaf retreat of sorts, kind of this commune for deaf people, and slowly realizes that there's a more insidious element to it, and then there's an interesting POV shift partway through the movie where a different character kind of becomes the protagonist. Oh, I forgot to say the director. Ted Evans made the film. I thought Retreat worked pretty well until it didn't. I was really engaged for maybe the first half, and then things got a little harder to believe in some ways, maybe a little more predictable or cliche. And then by the end, there's kind of just a weird turn, and the film actually ends with like a lengthy narrated monologue, which I thought was an odd choice given that the rest of the film clearly relied on this ethos of being exclusively in sign language. I thought it was a little weird to suddenly have the ending of the film rely so heavily on sound and on dialogue. Like, clearly that was an intentional choice, and I'm sure the director had intentions there, but I didn't quite get that the intention didn't quite come across for me. And I also questioned kind of the ethical motivation of the story. Obviously, the film is by a deaf person, so I feel like it's not really my place to say if the film is offensive to deaf people, but I did wonder what the motivation was behind making this commune of deaf people who continue to say throughout the film that they wanted to make a space for them, that was not ruled by the hearing and was not discriminatory. Making this commune into this like insidious evil cult that's kidnapping children, I thought was maybe not in the best taste. I don't feel like I can like deaf-splain that to someone who actually is deaf, so I don't know. But I'd be curious to hear more about the director's motivations there, because from my perspective, it felt a little, I guess, mean-spirited against those sentiments of wanting to create deaf-only spaces. But even just as a movie, like I said, I think it just loses track a little bit in that second half, so I didn't really enjoy it on the whole. I would give it a tentative thumbs down. It wasn't awful, and if you're interested in this kind of thing, by all means still see it, but it wasn't my favorite. I then actually had my first walkout of the festival. I had gone into a film called Silent Friend, directed by Ildiko Agneri, and I had gone into it thinking it sounded interesting. It's this film about a few different stories throughout history, all revolving around this same ginkgo tree, or not revolving around it, but existing in the presence of this ginkgo tree, who's sort of this silent friend, this silent observer. It's not that I thought it was bad necessarily, but it was a very long film, and it became clear to me early on that it would be very long, that the pace would be very slow, and I hadn't really eaten anything that day. I think that whole day was just a bit of an overstimulating day for me. I think maybe the lack of sleep was catching up to me, and I just wasn't really having it the entire day. I was on kind of a short fuse all day. None of the stories in the film were really connecting with me personally, and I could just feel how slow and laborious the whole thing was going to be, and I was hungry and tired, and I was thinking about how I still had another screening after this, and I just decided that I would rather go eat lunch than watch the rest of Silent Friend. So I awkwardly climbed over the other people in my row and just left. I don't feel that I can give it a thumbs up or thumbs down since I did not sit through the entire thing, but if you happen to be hungry and overstimulated, I wouldn't recommend this film. If you happen to be in the mood for a very long movie about a tree, then I would recommend it. The aforementioned fourth film of the day for me on the 15th was the gala screening of Scott Cooper's Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere. And this is definitely the film that I took the most physical notes about. It's all this down here, and all of this. One fun thing about the gala screening, and part of why I had made sure to get a ticket to the gala screening in the first place, is I thought this might happen, is Bruce Springsteen himself did show up to the screening, which was really exciting. I'm actually a big Bruce Springsteen fan. I've never gotten a chance to see him live. There's a little part of me that's a little afraid that I might never get the chance to see him live, so it was cool to just see him in person for the first time, even if I was up in the nosebleeds, so I couldn't really make him out that well, but I could definitely hear his extremely memorable voice from up there.
I always tease Jeremy by saying, damn, when did I get that handsome?
It's funny, he keeps telling the same joke in every interview, which I find very charming.
When I saw that clip, I said, gee, when did I get that good looking? I've said this line before, but I always go, damn, when did I get that good looking?
And again, keep in mind that this was my overstimulated day. I was on a short fuse this day, but I was really not having it with Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere. Most of the film is a pretty serviceable, if formulaic, biopic. It mostly follows all the same well-trodden biopic tropes. It's tasteful enough, it's not as corny as something like a Bohemian Rhapsody. About half of the movie is a mundane but decently effective Bruce Springsteen character study, and the other half is that corny, overdone, bold genius has a daring new idea that everyone around him thinks is so crazy it'll never work. Those were the parts where it got the most corny for me, because we've just seen this in so many biopics at this point. All those scenes where people are like, you're telling me he wants to do an album that he records in his house? He doesn't want a band? That's crazy. That'll never work. Yeah, late in the film, there's this scene where Bruce's manager, played by Jeremy Strong, is showing the new record, Nebraska, to like the stuffy studio rep who says to him, "You realize this is highly unorthodox." Like I said, it's not the corniest biopic in the world, but it did have its moments, like the manager scene that I mentioned before. But also there's a scene early on where Bruce is writing his songs for Nebraska, and he comes to this realization that he's not just writing about kind of the character that he's basing it on, he's writing about himself. So on his page of lyrics, he very deliberately and cornily crosses out the pronouns he and him and writes I and me. But anyway, like I said, most of the movie is serviceable until the last 15 or 20 minutes of the movie. Something very strange happens. All of a sudden, the film basically starts an entirely new Bruce Springsteen biopic, like with a new premise, and then has to hastily wrap that up in the final 20 minutes. What I mean by that is, at the end of the film, they very suddenly introduce the idea of Bruce Springsteen being extremely mentally ill and having a nervous breakdown. And I'm sure some annoying people would argue that this had been in the film up to this point. And yeah, like we've seen him be sad at times or reflect on his relationship with his father, but he always seemed pretty emotionally stable. Nothing about him really spoke to any linear progression of mental illness or mental exhaustion or anything. So when he just suddenly has a breakdown and like calls his manager like, "Jeremy Strong, I'm really not okay. I'm dying here." And Jeremy Strong is like, "Yeah, Bruce Springsteen, you need serious help, like from a professional." You're like, what is happening? Where is this coming from? Then, oh my God, there's this incredible cut where I think it's like we see Bruce Springsteen have his breakdown, and then we cut to 6 months later, and Jeremy Strong is there in the shot, just looking ahead, looking really sad. And I think what's going on, like editing-wise, storytelling-wise, is that if you as the viewer don't know anything about Bruce Springsteen, I think in this moment, there's supposed to be a fake out where you think Bruce Springsteen has killed himself, but then he like jumps into frame and hugs Jeremy Strong and you're like, oh, okay, he lived. It was a fake out, he's okay. I just found it really bizarre that the end of the film brings up this quite intense element of Bruce having a breakdown, needing mental help, and then just wraps it up really quickly, like gets him treatment, cuts to 6 months later, he's doing great again. That was definitely the weakest and most baffling part of the movie for me. It felt really ridiculous, totally took me out of it. And my last note about the film is that, remember that first trailer for the movie that came out that had that really silly narration, I think from Jeremy Strong, talking about how when Bruce was growing up, he had a hole in his bedroom floor.
When Bruce was little, he had a hole in the floor of his bedroom. The floor that's supposed to be solid, that you're supposed to be able to stand on.
That line is not in the movie. It's nowhere to be found unless they screened like the hole in the floor less cut at LFF. They cut that part out of the movie, which, you know, is fine and probably for the best because that was a very silly line in the trailer, but like is bold to take that kind of central part of the trailer and not actually put it in the final cut. Yeah, I did not think this was a very successful film, and I love Bruce Springsteen, so, you know, as a fan, I didn't even like it. I'd give it a thumbs down. The first film I saw on the 16th was Richard Linklater's Blue Moon, which is about the Rodgers and Hart composing duo. It specifically focuses on Hart, Lorenz Hart, the lyricist, and it all takes place over the course of one night, the opening night of Oklahoma, which of course was the first collaboration between Rodgers and Hammerstein, where Lorenz Hart was no longer working with Richard Rodgers. So it's kind of just this character study on Hart as he does his thing in the bar. We see him struggle with alcoholism. We see him struggle with the deterioration of his relationship with Richard Rodgers, and we see him navigate this new friendship / unrequited relationship with a character played by Margaret Qualley, who's this young, beautiful college student. I thought Blue Moon was enjoyable. I think some parts are definitely better than others. I was really enjoying the parts that explored the Rogers and Hart dynamic. Rogers is played by Andrew Scott in this film, and every scene between Andrew Scott and Ethan Hawke, who plays Hart, I thought was really strong. That dynamic that they were setting up, this sort of tired, exasperated relationship between the two of them, where Rogers does love Hart and misses their companionship and their creative partnership, but has been burned by Hart so many times before, has been disappointed by him. Hart's addiction and his unreliability have really soured their relationship. And it's a really well thought out dynamic, and it's painted very well in the film. The parts that I didn't find as enjoyable were honestly the parts between Ethan Hawke and Margaret Qualley. I just didn't find her character very interesting or compelling. And I almost think that's part of the point, because in the film, Hart has become infatuated with this college student, and he's clearly projecting a lot of things onto her. And in fact, every time he starts to try to wax poetic about how great she is, everybody around him gets kind of bored and exasperated. So I do wonder if it's partly intentional that she's not that interesting. But I think I just found the dynamic between the two of them a lot less engaging than the one between Rogers and Hart. And I was kind of wishing that the film had focused more on that. So I thought it was a little uneven, but it's pretty short and doesn't overstay its welcome. So I still enjoyed it, and I think it's worth a watch. I'd give it a thumbs up. I then saw another shorts program. This one was called Are You Kidding? It was like a comedy shorts program. Again, the shorts at this festival on the whole weren't wowing me that much, so I can't say I loved every single short. I would say of this selection, I enjoyed Crab Number 7. That one was fun. Mother Goose was also a good one. But this one was kind of hard because a lot of these were very short shorts, which isn't uncommon for comedy shorts. Sometimes they're kind of just like a little skit, which is fine, but it's harder for them to make as much of an impact, I think. I started the 17th with Lynn Ramsey's Die, My Love, another weird movie to see at 8 a.m. I enjoyed this one. I found it very bewitching, very captivating, hypnotic. I didn't really understand everything. Like, it's an interesting film in terms of its relationship to reality. You don't always know if what you're seeing is completely literal, especially towards the end. It starts to get a little more abstract. So I didn't fully compute everything that was happening, especially the ending, but I was engaged the whole time and I was enjoying it the whole time. So I don't really consider those things detrimental to the film. I really appreciated the use of sound design. It had this great overstimulating quality, but in a good way, in an effective way. And the music was effective as well. Both the diegetic and non-diegetic music I thought were all really good choices. So I would give it a thumbs up. I liked it. I then saw a public screening of Hikari's Rental Family. This is a Japanese film where Brendan Fraser plays an American actor who lives and works in Japan and gets this job in this rental family company that essentially rents out actors to play people in people's lives, whether for the purposes of kind of therapy or sometimes getting people out of a tight spot, whatever it may be. I liked this film well enough. It's another one that's kind of sentimental and corny and conventional, but successful at what it sets out to do. It is kind of a comedy drama, and I did think that there was comedy potential that the film didn't quite capitalize on. Towards the third act of the movie, there's actually all this kind of screwball potential, and then it just kind of goes away. They don't do anything with it. So I was a little disappointed by that. I thought Brendan Fraser was very good in his role. I'd give it a thumbs up, but it's another one that I would say is not really my kind of thing. I think it's another one that would be a good parent movie, a good mom movie. Your mom is gonna love it. I started the 18th with Oliver Hermanus's film, The History of Sound. I had heard very mixed things going into this film, so I wasn't sure what to expect, and I think I actually did like it more than I expected to. This one's almost a bit frustrating to me, because I think there's a pretty good film in there, that is cheapened and worsened by certain elements that were either unnecessary or just don't work very well. The crux of the movie, this historical romantic drama between Josh O'Connor and Paul Mescal, is pretty good, I thought. I found that believable and I found it emotional. The story is also about American folk music, and I thought the music elevated the story. The music is very beautiful and very emotional and helped with the emotional storytelling. But then there are these things that cheapen it a little. One of them is the narration. The narration is mostly only present in the first act from what I remember. And Paul Mescal is playing a Southern boy in the movie, and he's doing, as UK and Irish actors tend to do, he's doing a very out there, deliberate, kind of corny Southern accent. And that does not lend itself very well to narration, in my opinion. One of the very first things we hear in the movie is his narration saying something along the lines of, "My father said it was a gift from God."
My father said it was a gift from God.
And I remember hearing that and being like, oh no, I'm not in for something good. But that actually wasn't really reflective of the overall tone of the movie. So again, I think that's an example of the narration actually actively worsening the material. The narration was also just unnecessary. It wasn't really anything that we couldn't have gleaned from scenes and the movie itself. Another element like that is the coda of the film. The film ends with a flash forward to Mescal's character as a much older man who has now become a renowned musicologist. We see parts of the previous past timeline come back into the present, and I thought it was a little too much. The emotional culmination, having these things from the past come back, I thought that was a little too much and overdid it a little bit. It becomes a little hokey, in my opinion. I also thought flashing forward to the older character was not that effective because we had not been cutting back and forth with this character throughout the film. So rather than feeling like an older version of the character we know, it kind of just feels like an entirely new character. It doesn't quite track. It's hard to suspend our disbelief since we have only seen the younger version of this character up to this point. So I guess if I could have workshopped this film a little, I would have made it more just the straightforward story in the middle, just the story being told with Josh O'Connor and Paul Mescal. But even then, there's something that feels a little dated about the story of this film. There's just a kind of simplicity and of course, tragedy to it. No spoilers, but it's kind of a tragic story that actually feels dated. It reminds me of something that might have worked well as like a Merchant Ivory film in the 80s, but comes off a little tired in this day and age. It's like it's missing a certain twist or angle or lens to make it a little more fresh. I read that it's based on a short story, so maybe they felt a little constrained by what was in the short story. I think if I were them, I would have altered a few things to make it pop a little better as a feature film. I guess I would give it a tentative thumbs up, but I would say you probably only need to see it if you really like these actors or you think you'll be particularly interested in the material for any reason. Next that day, I saw Harry Lighton's film Pillion. This is a UK, I would say, coming-of-age comedy drama about a young man who gets involved with a motorcyclist who is in a kind of gay BDSM community. So they begin this dom-sub relationship that has some twists and turns and leads to the main character's coming-of-age story. I really liked Pillion. I thought it was very tight and well-structured, just a very new and unique take on a coming-of-age story. I think it's a lot more relatable and universal than you might expect from the subject matter. It's really not a very sexual story. A, I'm not saying that it being sexual would have been bad, and B, I'm not saying the sexual element is not part of it, but it's really more about the emotional dynamic and kind of this situation where one character is not receiving the emotional support necessary from a dynamic like this. And it's actually very nuanced and interesting and something that I haven't really seen depicted in a movie before. And it is also very funny. It's in many ways a comedy. I just thought it was a very nicely done film. I'd give it a thumbs up. I recommend it. I then saw a film called Sink, directed by Zain Durey. I was interested in this and liked it, I think, but I can't say it really grabbed me. I wasn't super engaged from the beginning, but I think the second half engaged me a little more than the first. It's a compelling family drama about a teenage son who starts dealing with some kind of mental health crisis. And it's a bit of a thriller. It's a bit surreal. It's very emotional. I thought it was good. I'd give it a thumbs up, but I wouldn't say it's one of my biggest takeaways from the festival. October 19th was the last day of the festival, and I started this day off with a screening at the BFI IMAX, a special screening of the newly restored director's cut of 1970s Bollywood Western classic Ramesh Sippy's Sholay. I had actually never seen Sholay, despite it being one of the most famous Bollywood movies of all time. I feel like I had always kind of been saving it for a rainy day, and I'm actually glad I did, because this was the rainy day I'd been waiting for, the day when the restored director's cut would be screening at the biggest screen in the UK. Sholay is an epic. It's a very long film. The director's cut was 3 hours and 24 minutes, and I loved every second of it. And to see this epic, beautifully made film with so many iconic characters and scenes and songs and lines of dialogue, to see that on this huge screen in a crowd of other excited people who had all chosen to come here and watch it because they loved it, it was so special. It was like Christmas to me. This movie's been out for like 50 years, but fuck it, I'm gonna review Sholay. In terms of it being a director's cut, obviously I hadn't seen it before, so I can't really compare it to the regular cut, but there was an introduction at the beginning from someone, I forget his name, but he's the director of the Mumbai Film Festival, I think the BFI representative said. And what he told us is that apparently in the original cut of Sholay, they don't kill the villain at the end. That was a result of censorship. Around the time the film was coming out, India was in a state of emergency. It was kind of a time of a lot of political turmoil, and apparently the censor board at the time said that the film couldn't show the villain being killed at the end, so they changed the ending. And now this restored version, in addition to a few other deleted scenes, included this original intended ending where they kill the villain. So although I hadn't seen the film before and therefore couldn't compare this version to the original, I was really, really excited to get to see it in the way that, by all accounts, the director had originally intended people to see it. It was just an incredible experience. It was one of my best theatrical experiences in a long time. Like I said, the film was 3 hours and 24 minutes long. It felt like half of that. You would never have guessed it was that long of a film. The pacing was just incredible. It's very emotional. The songs are so good. It has all these iconic moments where even watching it for the first time, you can just feel how these moments would have become ingrained in Indian film history. It's very clearly related to Kurosawa. It's clearly more than a little inspired by Seven Samurai, but it works, you know? America did their own Seven Samurai, so who cares? It's really fun to see Bollywood's take on the Western, the samurai film, all of these different influences coming together. I loved it. I don't know if you'll get a chance to see this in a theater, but if you do, or just to watch it at home, I give it a thumbs up. I would highly recommend it. Later that day, I ran back to the BFI to see a public screening of Paolo Stripoli's film, The Holy Boy. I had been interested in this one because it was one of the big horror films at the festival. I'm always interested in seeing horror at festivals if I can, because it is usually a less represented genre at a film festival. This was an Italian film. It actually had a slightly similar premise to a film I watched maybe a year ago when it had been recommended by Red Letter Media. It's a film called The King Tide. So it did feel like actually a rather familiar premise. I highly doubt there's any relationship there, that was intentional at all, but it's just kind of a similar premise in some ways. This movie was really working for me for most of it, but then it went on about 20 or 30 minutes longer than I thought it should. That bothers me. I feel like you see it a lot nowadays where a movie just doesn't quite know when to end. But other than that, I thought it was largely a very engrossing watch, so I'd give it a thumbs up. Finally, I ended my entire festival by going to see the gala screening of the closing night film, which was Julia Jackman's 100 Nights of Hero. This was based on a graphic novel, which I haven't read. It's kind of inspired by 101 Nights. It takes place in this kind of fantastical other world. I have to say, this film was a pretty big disappointment for me. I didn't completely hate it, but I thought it was pretty unsuccessful. There's just a bit of a limp safeness to the entire thing. It is clearly trying to make a social commentary. The social commentary is extremely broad and extremely banal. At the end, it's like, girls should be allowed to read books and stories are important, which, yeah, I agree on both fronts, but I didn't really need to watch a movie to learn those things. It's mostly a comedy at many points, and it did have its funny jokes and funny moments, but not enough of them and not consistently enough to carry the film as a comedy. There are other genre elements like fantasy and romance, etc., and I didn't think those elements were strong enough to carry it as those genres either. It just travels on this really low, one-note kind of road the entire time. It's almost difficult to explain, but it's kind of like a roller coaster that's just a straight line, or a meal that's all side dishes. You keep expecting something bigger or more meaningful or more poignant or more funny or more romantic or more something to happen, and it just doesn't. Given that it was called 100 Nights of Hero, and given that I had heard that it was all about someone telling stories, and given that I had heard it was somewhat based on 101 Nights, I kind of expected it to have a bunch of stories in it, but it actually just has one story that the titular hero tells over the course of many nights. And I don't mean to judge the film for my preconceived notions that turned out to be wrong, but given that the rest of the film was so kind of one note and so dull in some ways, I do think having it just be one story kind of hampered it. It made it feel all the more one note, all the more unexciting. Also, Charlie XCX stars in that story portion of the film for some reason. And I don't think she necessarily did a bad job. Honestly, I don't think she had that much to do, so it's hard to say if she did a good or bad job, but I did find her presence pretty distracting, and maybe that's on me, but that's how it was for me anyway. It's a shame because I saw Julia Jackman's debut at LFF 2023. It was a film called Bonus Track, and it was just this kind of simple, intimate teen romance film. And I really enjoyed that movie. I thought it was good. Like I said, that's a much more intimate, small-scale kind of movie, and I wonder if either Jackman is just better at telling that kind of story, or if, since that was her debut, maybe jumping from the very small-scale, intimate rom-com to a much larger scale, kind of more epic fantasy kind of film was just a bit too big of a leap so early in her career. But on the whole, it was a big disappointment. I was hoping to like it, and it was not very good or very notable. I would give it a thumbs down. And that was my festival. I hope this gave you a preview of some of the big players of the season, and maybe also a few recommendations you wouldn't otherwise hear about. I had such a great time at this year's festival. I think it was a great year for weird, daring movies. I saw so many creative, out-of-the-box films that really played with the medium, what's possible through cinema. And with that, I think it made the more conventional, bland movies stick out in a bad way. All these innovative voices, some of them brand new to feature filmmaking, made it all the more disappointing to see certain filmmakers who had ample resources make films so uninspired or so safe. It'll definitely be an interesting awards season. I could see it either being really vindicating or really frustrating. Check out my Patreon if you want to support me. Bye!